assess our students' speaking ability is through the use of a formal rubric, using a formal grading rubric. And Professora Giles will talk more about grading rubrics in her presentation today, so I'm not going to jump into that right away. She'll talk about syllabus and rubrics and grading. And then we've got our video camera here today. Videotaping or audio recording for later evaluation is another good way to capture that spoken word because it is something that's kind of fleeting, and if you evaluate it after the fact, then you have a chance to go and look at it again and again. Also, the student can look at it again, and that's really helpful. Okay, let's go back to here. Okay, I think we're here. Hot topics. I can tell that everyone wants to just collaborate together. Let's all work together instead of do teams. What is teacher talk? Teacher talk. Lecture. Yeah. And when we refer to teacher talk, a lot of times in education we talk about the amount, right? Teacher talk versus student talk. Okay. And the amount of time that a teacher spends talking versus the amount of time that students spend talking in the classroom. Okay. We'll talk about that a little bit more. I know this. Does this look familiar to anyone? I plus 1, crash in, right? So this is the formula for comprehensible input, where I equals what a student knows or can understand, and then the plus 1 is just that little extra that we want to push the student with scaffolding, of course, with appropriate help so that they reach that next level. And it's almost like climbing a ladder, right? So they can go from this rung to the next rung, and then they get from here. Okay, they're good here, and then we have to make them reach for the next rung. That's Krashen's I plus 1. Okay? Some of you are very familiar with this already. All right, and hot topics. The communicative approach. Does this sound familiar? This is also an important term in foreign language education. Communicative language teaching, or the communicative approach, is considered the best practice to teaching language. And by communicative, we mean lots and lots of talking in the classroom, valuable, authentic conversation in the classroom. And we're going to see examples today of how to get our students to this and using the communicative approach, using communicative language teaching. Okay? And then 400 is, so a student makes an error while they're speaking. When should we correct that error? Okay? We want to correct that error when a student is ready to acquire that form. So in Spanish, and maybe you can come up with a different example in Chinese, but in Spanish, you have to learn the present tense before you can learn the past tense. It doesn't make sense to, or a complicated version of the past tense. Doesn't make sense to start with the imperfect subjunctive if the student hasn't mastered the present tense, right? So that's what it means. And there is an order of acquisition. There's an acquisition theory that goes behind that. Now, if a student is making an error in their speech that is impeding communication, that means that you can't understand that, then that's something that you do need to address, okay? Try to elicit the correct answer, and if you're still not getting it, then that is something that you need to go back in and correct. Okay? Correcting a speech error is also important when you are focusing on a particular grammar point or a particular phonological point. And if the student is not understanding it, then you need to correct that, because that's the point of the exercise. And the other time when you need to step in and correct a student's speech is if the student is accidentally saying something that is embarrassing or offensive. Maybe the pronunciation is wrong and they're saying a word that might be offensive. You want to make sure that they don't embarrass themselves in the future by repeating that word, and that's something that maybe you just whisper to them on the side. you know, in English, this word means a bad thing, and maybe you should not say that again, okay? And then, of course, then the students, especially smaller ones, will want to use that word all the time. But that's advice that's for speech. Okay, so now we're done with our game playing here. Let's move on to just a little review of that game that we played. Communicative language teaching, the communicative approach. Now we're in the handout. The communicative approach is considered the best practice in the field of language acquisition. So when we're talking about communicative approach or communicative language teaching, that is the approach to teaching the target language. Okay? And in this communicative approach, communicative language teaching, the teacher carefully constructs activities, scenarios, games, and the curriculum to help the student prepare for real-life situations, authentic situations. And so what we want to do in our classes is design tasks in the class that require the students to speak. Okay? And we'll see examples that do require students to speak. I+1 again is comprehensible input. That means that we need to support our students, okay, in their learning. We need to know where our students are, the level, their proficiency level where they are, and then give them the appropriate scaffolding or support to help them reach that next level. Okay? And then here, IRE versus IRF, we'll talk about this as we go through. IRE is initiation, response, evaluation. And what I mean by initiation, response, evaluation is if I say, how are you today? Right? We're practicing something very basic. How are you today? And you say, I'm fine. And I say, very good. Okay, how are you today? And you say, I'm fine. I say, good. Okay, how are you today? Right? I'm evaluating your response. I'm saying, okay, that is the correct response. That is the correct response. So you're getting feedback, but I'm stopping the conversation, right? So that's not an authentic flow. It's not a natural flow of conversation, and it doesn't help acquire speaking, right? It doesn't help your students acquire speaking. So what we want to be thinking about is initiation, response, feedback. Okay? Initiation, response, feedback. And I say, good morning, how are you today? And you say, I'm fine. And I say, really? How was your weekend? And then you say, oh, my weekend was good. And I say, well, did you go to the store? Did you play with your kids? You know, and that is an authentic conversation, right? So we want to make sure that we have that back and forth. Now, I understand time is always limited. And so you can't have a 20-minute conversation with every student every time you ask a question. So a little back and forth, and then you move on, right? So you simulate that interaction, okay? And there are times, of course, when you're working on something very specific and you just need to sample to make sure everybody gets it. Okay, everybody's got it, good, let's move on to the next thing. Obviously, there are times when that's appropriate too. But do be thinking about this, and if you have a tendency to say, okay, very good, and then move on to the next student, try next time you're with your students to bring something more out of them. Okay? All right, now you guys, you've been in several workshops this summer, and I know you've heard some of this before, some of this should feel familiar. This is a question you've heard before in an earlier workshop. What percentage of target language use is our goal? In our classrooms, how much do we want to be speaking in the target language? How much do we want our students to be using the target language? What's our goal? It's on the slide, so you can cheat and read it, right? Our goal, naturally, 100%, right? Wouldn't that be fantastic? 100%. Because the more we use the language, the better we're going to get, the more deeply we're going to acquire that language, as opposed to just rote memorization of the language. Okay, muy bien. Nada. Correr. Clase, correr. 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 Saltar. Saltar. Nadar. Nadar. Saltar. Saltar. Correr. Correr. Nadar. Nadar. Actions. Yes. Correr. Correr. Nadar. 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 Correr. Correr. Ganar.
How to say yes?
Sí. Gané.
How to say no in Spanish?
How to say what?
How to say no?
No?
No.
No.
Just no.
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah and no.
Sí.
Sí.
Okay. So another thing, you put a gesture. How do you say I won in Chinese?
Ying.
Okay, so you can put that. Now you taught a phrase with your action and a verb. Okay, so you have a connection. Okay, so when my students are saying I won, I say gané. Okay, so now they have a verb also with the action. Okay, correr. Nadar. Saltar. Ganar. Saltar. Nadar. Correr. So you see, I continue and I go out of order. It's not the same order. The students will remember the order, not the meaning. So it shows the meaning. There are some vocabulary words that are easier to do with gestures. A phrase, maybe not just verbs. I can say apple. Apple is a noun. But what could be my action? Right into it. So you can think of a gesture, an action to go with what you're trying to teach. I do that at the beginning of class, okay, when students are dead and sleeping. I do that if I'm not getting participation. Okay, let's get up. Okay, we need to change the pace. Or at the end, and I'm going to test you at the end to see if you remember these words. Okay, very good. Any questions? Good? Okay, now another thing is vocabulary clues. Okay, so I said I'm going to show you examples around the idea of Olympics. This would be, I would prepare this list. It can be as long or as short as you would like. Would you like to test? And definition. Do you guys know the game password? I don't know if you know the game password, where you try to say the word to get somebody to guess the word without saying the word. Okay. So for example, how can I state Olympics? International games played every 4 years. Over 200 countries participate. 8 rings. Five rings. Colors, okay? Gold. What can I say about gold without saying gold? Okay, a medal. Round. Okay, when you win it. Yellow medal. First prize. Expensive. First prize. High honor. Okay. Silver. Second place in the Olympics. Okay. Medal. What color medal? Silver. No, you're gonna silver.
Light green.
Light gray. Light gray.
Shiny gray.
Shiny. Good. Country. Hard. More abstract. But what can I say? Other words for country. I can say over 200 of these participate in the Olympics. I can say represented with a flag. I can say, help me, food.
A large
Nationality, a large community. Okay. Government. Okay.
My hometown.
Okay. My family's home country is Cuba. I gave an example. I didn't say country. Cuba, China, United States. Okay, so I'm giving associations. Lands.
Capital city.
Or capital, right? Run. Walking fast. Jump. To me, this approach is excellent, but it's also more teacher-led. I like to have, as Monica was saying, student-centered, where the students are doing the work. I did the work before class, okay? And now I am facilitating
and they are working in small groups. So another version of bingo, which the models then are on pages 5, 6, 7, and 8 of your packet. So this would be the model. So I will take my own created definitions or student associations definitions that we just did, and I write clues, okay, for the vocabulary. This is perhaps homework the night before we do this activity in class. So let me show you, this is something that I actually created for my classroom. Okay? Of course, students don't have the answer yet. Okay, so they have associations, definitions, and they have a word bank. A word bank. So I want to work on these 25 words. Okay? And so they see the clues. Monica pointed out that you want to make sure students are familiar before you, and then we go over it, make sure they have the right response. Now, I have a group of 3 students. Okay, 1, 2, 3 students. We are in a circle. Okay, so 3 players. Player 1, player 2, player 3. Player 4, teacher. And it could be another student. Okay, it could be another student. The 4th player is a student. The 4th player reads the definitions, the student plays. Okay, so it's groups. So in a class of 20, I would have 5 groups of students instead of 1 big group, 4 little groups. And then I'm walking around facilitating, listening, helping, correcting pronunciation. So then I would say, cost a lot of money. Yeah, you don't know, it's all Spanish. Expensive. He has expensive, he writes expensive. If we do this, metal, that is gray. Silver, he marks it on his paper. So it's a way to have students in small group. They are doing the work. Okay? So now in your packet you have a template. If you want to write in Chinese symbols, either words, with the Chinese, so you write it in. And you have 3 different versions, right? Because you don't want students winning at the same time. So that's bingo, 2 different versions of bingo. Pardon? Yes?
I had a question about the word banks.
Okay.
Since I've been in a number of classes in a number of language classes that have done word banks, I've seen some that don't have word banks at all and expect you to know off the top of your head. I've seen some with word banks, and I've seen some word banks that have more answers than you can possibly fill in.
Right.
So some are fake. Among them, which do you think is the most useful for, I suppose, middle level learners who are above the beginning phase but aren't yet at the very
Right.
end?
So definitely not a blank word bank. I think for an intermediate, you would need, what words you're going to use.
Okay.
And then what he's saying is, so I have 25 clues and 25 words. That's an equal number. Sometimes you can trick your students and put 30 words and 25 clues so you don't use them. That's a little bit higher. So you could, for an intermediate level, I wouldn't say that's the first activity. That's the activity before the test.
Okay.
You see where they have more experience with the language.
Okay, so the first
Both,
activity is to use the word bank, and then the second one is to give them the same word bank, but add a couple other things to see if
Exactly.
they've absorbed
And
it.
then something that I always do, I say, hey, it's in your book on this page, so you can have the definitions there too, so that I'm not expecting them to be experts on everything right away. So we have two types of bingo. Again, I'm going to review all of these activities at the end. It's overwhelming, so you can talk about them with your peers. Okay. Here's another one, a team game. It's called Jump and Shout. Do you remember jump in Spanish? Salta. Okay, salta y grita. Jump and shout. Okay. This activity, and this is more